Welcome to another episode of Race Talk with Lane and Eugene. It is our mission to provide a virtual platform of curated, inclusive conversations, bringing together like-minded individuals of diverse races and backgrounds to discuss issues of race in America. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Race Talk with Lane and Eugene. I'm Eugene Holden, and today we're doing Race Talk with my brother Tyrone Cozy, who will be speaking on reparations and the enslavement and how all of that was came about. I want to welcome all of you again to Race Talk. We've been doing this for a little while, and I am so grateful that you guys keep showing up. Let me give you a little background about our guest today, Tyrone Cozy. Tyrone Cozy has been serving others for a long time, and this is the cornerstone of his life. He says that serving others has been the cornerstone of his life. And in addition to serving Oakland and the surrounding Bay Area communities for 8 years, advocating for financial empowerment and economic justice, Tyrone is also a powerful vocalist. He's a recording artist, he's a songwriter, he's an arranger, he's a vocal coach. Tyrone has served East Bay Church of Religious Science for more than 39 years as the founding director of the International Mass Choir. He's been the minister of music, and he is the current leader of East Bay's Men's Chorus. And he's the co-facilitator of the Spiritual Man's Circle. Tyrone Cozy served as the Northwestern Regional Market President for Operation Hope, which is a leading global nonprofit dedicated to financial empowerment for low to moderate income families. Mr. Cozy has delivered financial education services to more than 75,000 residents in the San Francisco Bay Area. For more than 2 decades, Tyrone has forged and sustained strong long-term community partnerships with nonprofits, faith-based institutions, school districts, real estate professionals, and federal, state, county, and local municipalities. Currently, Tyrone is the managing partner and owner of Cozo Consultants, LLC, helping nonprofits create sustainable fund development strategies and advising financial institutions on investing in community organizations in alignment with their business and philanthropic objectives. Also, from a personal note, Tyrone and I have been knowing each other for a while, and it's a great pleasure and an honor to know this man here. So, Race Talk family, I give you Mr. Tyrone Cozy. Welcome, brother.
Thank you, Eugene. I appreciate it. Hello, Race Talk family. I've enjoyed so much being a part of your program, Eugene. Race Talks with Lane Cobb and Eugene Holden. Thank you, Lane, and bless you and your wonderful family. I haven't met your mom and dad before, but I know I just fall in love with them if I did have a chance to meet them face to face, because they're a good product that came out of the two of them. So, well, let's just get into it. It's a big subject, and I want to say right now, I'm no expert at all on this, but I am someone who's been always fascinated by this portion of history, and now more than ever seeing the impact. So the subject is reparations, excuse me, the impact, the economic impact of enslavement. So, Gene, let's get started. If you could roll it back to the first one for me, I appreciate that, Gene. There you go. Thank you. So reparations, economic impact of enslavement. If you see this picture here, you see a family that probably in maybe the early 1900s, maybe around 1910, 1914, and then contrast with a modern family today on the right. I think this is, as we get into it more, you'll see that there's a real correlation between these generations. And we're going to get into a little bit more of that as we move forward. So quick introduction, more than 30 years serving the Bay Area community, both business and nonprofits. Like Gene said, I've always been committed to a sense of fairness and wanting to always help others. Currently, I have my own consulting firm, and Eugene shared what that role is, working with nonprofits and for-profit companies. And I spent 8 years as the market president for Operation Hope. And I like to mention that Hope is, as I already mentioned, a global organization that focuses on financial education. But there were three key programs, with one that we ran for some time for the city of Oakland, and that was the Bank on Oakland program for those who were underbanked, as well as those who are unbanked. But the credit money management program, we offer workshops twice a month. Home ownership, we have workshops there in the small business. And I would always like to go and address the workshop classes. I just, love watching people trying to rise out of their circumstances. And I will remind people that they are not that credit score. Who they are is way beyond what their credit score is. But the subject is much deeper than that. That's the personal responsibility that we can take to say that where we are right now doesn't mean that's where we got to be, and that we can always rise above whatever the circumstances are. That's part of the resilience, I think, of African Americans in this country. So that information was one of the reasons why I decided to get into this kind of work, because I really wanted to make a difference in how people move forward with their lives and have the highest quality life as possible in their world. So 3 questions that are often asked, and I like to say they're often asked and they're often thought of, but not asked. That is, well, why should I be concerned about something that happened years ago and that I had nothing to do with, right? Does reparations mean taking unearned monies away from white people? More handouts? And the last one, this is the one that kind of cracks me up, are Black people using this as an excuse for their own inadequacies by not, quote, pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps? We've all heard that statement before. I think the way I want to respond to this is to tell you a little story. Tell you a story about Lisa Drumright. Now, Lisa Drumright was the great-great-grandmother of Michelle Singletary, who was the author of an article in the Washington Post, Personal Finances, last year called, "Yes, Black Americans are entitled to reparations. We earned them." And she tells a story about Lisa. Lisa was a slave, and she was owned by a family who forced her to breastfeed their white baby. In fact, they insisted that she could only feed her Black baby on her right breast. Reason for that is because of a belief then that said that the left breast was closer to the heart, therefore the milk is pure. So one day she came in being exhausted, out in the field working all day. She came into the kitchen bone tired and had to feed her baby. So she started feeding her beautiful Black baby on her left breast. Well, the slave owner's wife walked in, saw her, slapped the mess out of her. And then later it was reported from her grandmother and her great-grandmother that she was whipped, severely whipped because of that. So Michelle's point was that not only did that leave a tremendous pain and scar on her family, but, and yes, it was a theft. You didn't even own your own body. But what happened to Black folks was a theft too. And so we're going to dive in a little bit more of that and see how true is that. I want to start with the story of the Freedmen's Bank, also referred to as the Freedmen's Savings and Trust Company from 1865 to 1875. It was Lincoln's wish after emancipation that recently freed slaves would understand the language of money, very important to him. So in 1865, Congress established the Freedmen's Act under the Freedmen's Bureau. Originally located, the bank itself was located across from the White House. And I love the story of how Lincoln would look directly out across from the White House to see the bank. He would love to see the oil lights that were lit in the window at night. This was important to him because on one side of the White House was the Congress, and on the other side was the Treasury. And there were tunnels that led underneath to both those locations. He would cut a deal over here with the Congress and then go over and get the money that was needed. But it was important to him to see that bank, keep his eye on it. Whereas we all know that less than 5 weeks later, Lincoln was assassinated. And this is pretty mind-blowing when you think about the impact of the bank. It had 37 branches in 17 states. It was 70,000 depositors, 57 million deposits. And soon after that, Congress voted to permanently close the Freedmen's Bureau. And that bureau was designed originally to support newly freed slaves and adjusting to society and et cetera. This is that whole 40 acres and a mule thing came from that original act. Well, it was all nullified as well by Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson was really clear. He was a white supremacist, absolutely. He made it clear that as long as he's in office, it will only be white people running this country. And so all that began to undermine this whole wonderful experience, this experiment that President Lincoln was putting in place. Bank stayed open for another 2 years after the act was nullified. And Frederick Douglass, a lot of people didn't know this, in 1874, he was asked to become the bank president for the final year. Once he got in there, he found out there was, terrible embezzlements, poor investments in other businesses. And of course, all the bank people ran it at the top level were white at the time. He even invested $20,000 of his own money. You can imagine what that wealth is today, what's that's worth. But it didn't survive. The good news about it, though, is that there is probably the best record that exists of newly freed slaves that emancipated people who invested. Their names are recorded. It's probably one of the best historical evidence of the impact that this bank had on thousands and thousands of Black folks. So then came the Homestead Act. And this is interesting. The Homestead Act went into effect before emancipation. And part of the reason why is because it was definitely a wealth building strategy for whites. Now, what do I mean by that? They put that in place before emancipation. When emancipation hit, it made a huge difference in the society. The next slide will go into that in a moment. But I wanted to point something out, that over 160 acres of land were given per family to 93 million Southern white Americans at that time. Out of more than 4 million previously enslaved people, right? Less than 4,000 received their, quote, 40 acres and a mule, 1862. Now, why is this significant? Thank you, Gene. So what happened after emancipation? Well, this is very significant because the state of the economy went bonkers in this country, right? The Confederate States lost 50% of its total wealth. Now, put that in perspective, right? 61% of US exports were cotton. Cotton was king. There was something like 20 million people lost jobs across the globe because everything was so connected to this industry, right? Because why was it king? Can't get any better than free labor, and free labor produced so much that got out into the world. And so this has had a big impact, scared the heck out of folks. They didn't know what they were going to do, right? And so they started to develop something. Now, we had Reconstruction was going on, but then Jim Crow showed up. And Jim Crow, this is really defined by many of the experts, really was a system of laws that reinforced extreme violence against Black people. And these laws were serious. They're putting in the system of laws that reinforced acts like this, vagrancy, right? If there was a vagrancy that took place, you could go to jail for that. Contract enforcement. If you went into an agreement with a landowner that you were going to get a tenant of land, you're going to work that land, and you would work with creating crops, and you were able to sell them and feed your own self. If you decided if you couldn't meet your contract responsibilities, you would be enforced. In other words, jail time would show up. You could actually spend time in jail. And then if you were in jail and you said, well, look, I don't want to deal with these people. I mean, I got 3 square meals that's in jail. No, they then took you and they leased you out, convict leasing, maybe back to the same plantation you didn't want to go to, or maybe some other ones. And even the plea bargaining that we understand today also came out of Jim Crow laws. And the power of this is that indentured servitude piece that I want to mention. Most of us are familiar with indentured servitude, but for Black sharecroppers, because they were both white and Black indentured servants, as we know, but Black sharecroppers were charged 70% interest on their equipment, on the seed. In other words, the landowners would spot them, you know, the expenses that happen on the front end, and then when they develop their crops, and you know, it's not overnight. This is a sharecropping society. Agriculture would take a year in order to plant and wait for the yield that would come from that. They were always in debt. They were never able to get quite out of debt because of the way the interest was set up and the way the game was stacked from the beginning. So what is a Black tax? And this comes from a brilliant young man named Sean Rochester, who wrote a book called Black Tax, The Cost of Being Black in America. And his quote is this: financial cost. What is Black tax? It's a financial cost placed on Black Americans by people and institutions that have a conscious or unconscious racial bias against Black Americans, resulting in systematic disenfranchisement. Now, what's a couple of examples of that? Well, let's look at how this impacts us today, right? 2019, a Gallup poll found that 67% of Americans really thought the legacy of slavery definitely still affects our society today. But only 29% of Americans approved of cash payments to descendants of enslaved people, right? You know, how's that going to be done, etc. But big difference between 67 and 29%. In 2012, Associated Press study by Stanford, University of Michigan, University of Chicago, what these researchers found is very interesting. A portion of Americans expressing explicit anti-Black attitudes equal to about 51% of the population. Portion of Americans expressing implicit anti-Black attitudes was 56%, even more. And I think a good example was one of the studies, I believe it was by University of Michigan, that they did the resume survey, in a way, a resume study. And this was interesting. Same resume, same background, same experience, only one had a white sounding name, one had a Black sounding name. And when that was presented to employers, 30% more times were the white sounding names selected than the Black sounding names, exact same resume. So that's the impact today, especially those who think that they're just so liberal and they just feel so connected. And it's true, we have some amazing allies. It doesn't mean that there's still not biases that are hidden in there somewhere. And I think that this is something we need to slow down and take a little bit closer look at. So let's look at this in value. And there's a couple little things I want to discuss about this part. So today's value of the 100% tax that was placed on uncompensated labor from 1619 to 1865 is worth about $50 trillion today. 50 trillion, can you wrap your head around that? Like in 1860, the estimated economic value of 4 million enslaved people was 16% to 20% of the US wealth. Now put that in perspective of the GDP, that's about 1 to 2 years of national income. Contrast that with 2016, you have an estimated US wealth was about 85 trillion. The GDP was about 28.5 trillion. They averaged that a little bit. They dropped down to 85 trillion just to give a more conservative number. And they averaged out, combined averages around 22 trillion. So in 2016, the equivalent value for 4 million enslaved people, this is important, is 15.5 trillion, equivalent today. But the estimated current value, net worth of 40 million Black Americans in this country, is 1.5 trillion. That's 15 times less value than in 1860. Now, sit with that for a minute, right? And a quote from Sean Rogers is that missing 6 million jobs and 1.4 million businesses. Now this is with staff, it's not individual businesses. Combined with 8 trillion of wealth missing from the Black communities are the single biggest driver of almost all the socioeconomic problems faced by African Americans. That's a pretty powerful statement, right? So you're talking about the impact that in housing, the impact in education, the impact in insurance, be able to afford insurance. The impact in particularly the criminal justice system. So there are a lot of areas across the board. And I think in our current environment, we're looking with the impact of COVID, we always hear these things about vulnerable communities. Communities have been with predisposed conditions. That's the reason why, 3 to 4 times more Black people are dying, people of color are dying compared to whites during this period. All this is connected, goes back hundreds of years if we stop and take a closer look at it. And so where do we go from here? Let me just add one other point that I think is important, and I wanted to share this with you. This is a quote from Here to Equality, and great article, landmark article called Reparations of Black Americans in the 21st Century. And here's a quote directly from Dr. Darity and Kirsten Mueller, is that the case for justice must include identification of not only the perpetrators of racial harm, but also those who gained from the harm, whether or not they inflicted it. So by the year 2000, estimated number of adult descendants of the original land grants was 46 million people, about 1/4 of the US population. This is huge. And then when you look at the total amount of money, you saw a slide earlier that talked about around 93 million, that comes out to about, today's term, about 1 million per family. That's a hell of a bootstrap. Is $1 million is a hell of a bootstrap. So where do we go from here? Well,
Tyrone, real fast. Can you repeat that quote from, please?
The case for justice must include identification of not only the perpetrators of racial harm, but also those who gained from the harm, whether or not they inflicted it. Whether or not they inflicted it. You know, there was, I'll give you another quick example of it. Over this period of time, this is according to this in-depth study that was done from Here to Equality, mentioned that this study revealed to us that the immense differences in the accumulation of wealth transfer over 3 to 4 generations. So a typical white family has access to 6 times as many transfers of wealth from older to younger generation as a Black family, single Black family. So serious disproportionate transfer of wealth to whites, you know, serious. And so this is the core of it. If we look at the numbers, take the passion out, set aside a story about Lisa Drumright, as immoral and horrifying as that is. We look at the pure economics of it. You can see, according to our own justice system, that people have an opportunity to have harm redressed, to have it acknowledged, have it redressed, and bring some closure to it. And that's what brings us to this next part. And that's called the arc of reparation, excuse me. The acknowledgement of what happened, just starting with that. We are, you know, you can't fix nothing if you can't acknowledge that it exists. You know, how do you heal a disease if you don't know it exists, right? And so acknowledgement is probably number one. It reminds me of the reconciliation. I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, but in South Africa, the commission, Eugene, I think you remember that, for a time that was dealing with the pain, reconciliation commission. I think that's the name of it. So acknowledgement, then redress. What do we do about it? That's a big question. You know, we need to step back and look at that. And then closure, you know, an apology, you know, an understanding of it. For some Black people, that's enough as an apology. But to really address it economically, you got to start with acknowledgement, redress, and closure. And then another one presented by Sean was a PhD. And his thought around that is you purchase from Black businesses, which creates Black jobs, which helps to uplift the Black community. You hire people, you get them in boardrooms, you know, have Black people part of your group. You hire them, bring more people. You look for them in high tech. You look at areas where Black people have not been that involved in. All this is connected to the past. And then deposit. What does that mean? Well, you can deposit in Black banks. You can help organizations that help other people of low to moderate income help their life improve, the quality of their life. Their financial well-being is impacted by all of this. So reparations, well, I love this quote. And I even love the expression on James Baldwin's face. It's like, duh. You always told me progress takes time. It has taken my father's time, my mother's time, my uncle's time, my brother and sister's time, my niece and my nephew's time. How much time do you want for your progress? Hell of a question. So now we want to open it up for discussion. Before we do, I want to recommend some resources. I've already mentioned a couple already, but Felicia and I watched the movie the other day called Armistead. Some of you may remember that. Steven Spielberg movie. Well worth watching again, because in our pondering and my preparation for this, we didn't plan that. We just decided we wanted to watch this movie again during Black History Month. And it was quite telling. In fact, I didn't know that the lawyer who went to represent the Armistead, the Africans who came over, was a real estate lawyer initially, because all this was a question about property ownership at the time, which is just fascinating. I think it really gives an insight into the mindset of the powers in place at that time, how they viewed and justified the existence of slavery. And yes, slavery existed in Africa, slavery existed for ancient times in Egypt, etc. But there was no institution as peculiar as American slavery. Nothing was designed to denigrate and to literally place thoughts into the minds of another race that they're inferior. And thank God that we didn't buy into that completely, because out of that came a religion that was being forced on us. It's Christianity. And we dug in there and we found the spiritual essence of that. And we're able to, through our resilience and perseverance and faith in the Creator, you know, the wholeness of the Creator helped us to survive this amazing time. But there's a lot to be done. And I'm hoping that this is really just beginning to open up the conversation about it. I don't have solutions. You know, part of me doesn't think, I don't want to be given any handout. But John Bryant used to say, you know, black folks don't want a handout, they want a hand up. And there's a big difference between the two. So I want to say to all my white allies that are out here right now, I just want to acknowledge you, because you are focused on trying to make a difference. I really honor that. But I want to implore you to read more, go deeper into this, understand it more. You don't necessarily have to say I'm for it or I'm against it. When you begin to understand it more, then maybe that will give us a broader perspective of where we are today and how we got here. Thank you so much.
Brother Tyrone, thank you so very much, man. I have a couple of questions that came up for me, and I want to start with the Homestead Act. And so with the Homestead Act, it was basically, you said 1862, right? Yeah, and it was for, you know, for the white people in the country. How many acres? That's crazy.
246 million acres of land was distributed to whites. We're talking Florida, Alabama, Georgia, North and South Carolina, Virginia, combined. And those are the, let's say, 3 years. Now this is important, 3 years before the actual emancipation. So, you know, in other words, land had already been grabbed because of the Civil War. It was grabbed, it was confiscated, it was taken away from the Confederate States. And so they were putting a plan in process to start to give the land back. And that's where the whole 40 acres of new thing was for us. But truth of the matter is that it did way beyond that for the other folks, you know, before this point. So anyway, it was an interesting thing that it took place before, and I thought that's something to know.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's interesting, when you were just speaking about all the land that was taken through all of these states, you know, and before the Confederates got there, right? Because so where the land was taken from, the Native Americans, the indigenous people of the country, you know, and I remember doing some research on my own on this in terms of the creation of the tobacco field, or the crops and the cotton fields that they had to have the land. So what did they do, right? And so they moved the original people off of their land. And then everything, again, economics, economics. So you talked about the Freedmen's Bank, and I don't know why I have this question here. Why did the bank close? You already talked about that. But there was something that you said, that in the last year where Frederick Douglass was the president of the bank, something that you said that hit me. Where did it go? So white people ran the Freedmen's Bureau?
Well, the CEOs, the bank, the people who made the real decisions. Now, most of the employees were Black. I mean, I've seen photos of this, and the people working in the various aspects of the bank, they were Black. But there were the CEO wasn't Black. I mean, the first Black CEO was really Frederick Douglass. So it was controlled by a different group of people who were investing that money any way they wanted to invest it. And really didn't, it wasn't about caring about the people who were depositors. It was more about, using it to whatever way they want to use. I can only imagine that their respect for that was zero, because they would just do, what they wanted to do. And when he got it, he saw how messed up it was. So, so he tried to turn it around, but it wasn't possible to do that. Now, the building where it was located, that building got torn down afterwards, and then the Treasury Annex was built in this place. That's what's directly across from the White House now, right? But a couple of years ago, thanks to Operations and others, they renamed it. They went back, revisited, and they gave the original name back to it, which was, the Freedmen's, bank initially. But yes, that was part of what was going on, and I think he was frustrated by it. It's kind of like, it's as if someone hired you knowing you're going to fail, So we're hiring you to fail to a certain extent. But I think it's one of the tragedies in our history, because not only did it take money from me, and it explains why a lot of Black people don't trust banks. That's a big reason why. It's kind of in our DNA, and sometimes we don't even realize where it came from. All we know is that feeling was passed down, over the years. And it's another reason why a lot of Black people didn't talk about it. Our great-great-grandparents didn't really want to talk a lot about that period in time, because it was so traumatizing for them. So we're fortunate that there are some stories that have come from that help us understand the nature of the times and how determined and resilient we were to, trying to move perseverance that we had going on to push beyond that. But yes, I hope I answered that, but that's kind of tricky, but yeah, that was good.
Yeah, it's interesting. You just mentioned about, why it could be in the DNA, why a lot of Black people don't trust banks. It's interesting that same distrust goes to the medical field too, right?
That's right. No, that's true. Medical field, IT, where you have a really small percentage of Black folks in it, the impact they had on education, right? We were all told in civil rights time, well, you get the education and you can move up. Right. Well, that was true to a certain extent, but not really, dealing with the whole economic aspect. In fact, I mentioned that Dr. King in his book, Chaos of Community, he really was focused on that in his latter years. That's the reason why he was looking at Vietnam, he was at the Poor People's Campaign. He made a pivot and realized, okay, we worked hard to get the voting rights locked in. We got to work on the economics rights now. We got to work on that part, because he knew what ran this country. Right,
yeah. Check out your chat. Where else does this have an effect? Thank you.
I would say every aspect, education, right? Number of Black doctors, small percentage. Number of Black lawyers compared to small percentage. Teachers, Black teachers, very prevalent in the 1900s, because that was the field. You professionally, you became that, or you became a dentist, or something, a veterinarian, that kind of stuff. But teachers were held in high esteem. Look at it today when we have the Desegregation Act. That impacted a lot of Black teachers. And I remember a time my parents used to tell me, man, it was beautiful, man. Chicago, I think Dean, thank you, Dean, for making this comment, but in Chicago, you're right. In Chicago, we had Black doctors, Black dentists. We had everybody in the community. Everybody was supporting it. When quote unquote integration kicked in, that stuff started to dissolve, started to break up, to disintegrate. And that had a big impact on the economy for Black people. You look at Black Wall Street, Oklahoma stuff. I mean, you know, burnt to the ground, you know, people who were successful, you know. And then during the Jim Crow period was just lynchings were like a picnic. People would get dressed up, take the kids, get the picnic baskets and go out and watch folks get lynched. Right. Yeah, that was sending a message to Black people. The more you step over the line, the more you're going to die. Think of the impact that has on people.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
So yes, you're right, Eugene, across housing. Housing is probably one of the big, still discrimination. You know, when I got into the housing industry and I worked for a title company, I was shocked when I started reading covenants. That is as late as like the late 1950s, the 1960s, in some cases, the late 1960s, there were still covenants in these title pages that saying you cannot sell your property to a Negro. Yeah. Cannot sell it. Yeah. You know, examples given about people who wanted to rent. Again, another study, send a white person in who wants to rent a house, you know, immediately get the house. Send a Black person in, it's a whole different story. Nope, sorry, you know, oh, your credit's not whatever. So this is still going on today. This is not, and it's right. All remnant. It's the echo of what's occurred in the past. Right. So, you know, for people saying, I don't want to give anybody anything, I had nothing to do with it. Well, guess what? You benefited from it. Your parents and your parents, 6 times the amount of wealth transferred compared to one single family. You know, there was more wealth transfer from 2 generations, from a great grandfather to a grandfather to a father, right? More of that transfer money took place in Black communities. This is the reason why you have this big gap in terms of the wealth gap. I like to call it the racial wealth gap, you know, because that's the difference in just a wealth gap. It's definitely created because of the situation in this country. And God bless that maybe now we're moving towards trying to understand it better, trying to talk about it.
That was very key what you said. You know, it was very key what you just said. You know, God bless that we're moving toward understanding it. You know, because we have to understand what's going on before we can even talk about how to fix it. We have to understand what's going on. Yeah. You know,
so important.
It really is. There's something, and I know you and I talked about this one day, talking about, you know, pulling yourself up by your own bootstrap. And the question I have is, how do you expect me to pull myself up from my own bootstraps when I haven't taken off the shackles yet, right? And I know that some people think that we're talking about the physical shackles. No, the physical shackles are nothing compared to the mental. You know, the shackles that have been deliberately put on, you know, especially through this financial part. Yeah. You know,
so, you know, and to that point, I think this is where, and we didn't get into this that much on our conversations, but this is where the spirituality aspect is so valuable, you know, because that is a thread that runs through all the tapestries. It's a thread that's very important. How did we survive this time? I mean, you know, when we talk a lot about it today, we all realize that sometimes people could become tone deaf about this. Not just white people, Black people. We could become tone deaf because we're tired of this feeling like, you know, this is all in our head. You know, this is what we're feeling. We're the victims. You know, it's kind of on us. It's our problem. You know, and that's also part of the insidiousness, you know, of this process, because that's something that's been planted. So you're right. It's the shackles of the mind. You know, we used to joke around talking about neo-colonialism. Back in the day, we're talking, put a little neo-cologne on. You know, because we joked about it, but it was a very, you know, it's a tragic thing to think about. You know, you plant the ideas in someone, and you no longer have to be the oppressor. One will hold those thoughts on their own without any help from you. And I think part of what we've done with the Black Power movement, the Civil Rights movement, Black awareness, you know, the whole Black Lives Matter, all this is connected to our recognition of our wealth and our value to ourselves first. And so we're at a new dawn. I think it's a civil rights 2.0 right now. We're looking at this from a fresh perspective, and it takes all of us to do.
Yeah, this is true. Yeah. Yeah, there are a couple of things before we close this up, Brother Tubman. I'm looking at something that I've not seen before or heard, and I wonder if you can speak to it. Silver rights, not civil rights, but silver rights.
Yeah.
Do you know what that is?
Yeah, sure. That's a phrase coined by Mr. John Bryant. John Bryant is the John Hope Bryant is the founder and CEO for Operation Hope, this organization I work with. Very dynamic speaker. And he used that term and says, we're not in the civil rights era anymore, we're in the silver rights. And his point was that, certainly in the 60s, we did a lot of protests in the street. Now, he made the statement recently before George Floyd, et cetera. But, in the 60s, 70s, it was about civil rights, it's about marching and protesting in the streets. Today, it's about being in the boardrooms instead of on the street. So his point was that once we work with the mentality around financial well-being, around economic empowerment, that's the real core of it. And he wasn't putting civil rights down, but he was just kind of giving an example where we are today. I use the term civil rights 2.0. I get where he was coming from. He was using words, well, yeah, civil rights, but silver rights. That's where we are today, understanding that connection with money. Did that help?
Yes, yes. Thank you. Tyrone, I have one last question before we go. How, and this has to do with PhD, right? How or what can companies do or what can we do to put that PhD model into action? What can companies do to put that into action?
Good question. I think, first of all, let's just look at the facts of a few things. I say, check the facts. I always like to say that, right? Give me an example. Nike is considered what? Of the top 100 companies, I think is down like, 40, something like that in the list, right? Nike made more money last year than all of the top 100 Black businesses combined, right? So, and African-American consumers spend 98.7% of their consumer dollars with white businesses, non-Black owned businesses. So the consumer power is great. John Bryant wrote this book about how the poor can save capitalism. Outrageous title. But what he was referring to was how the power of the Black consumer is so great that if the financial world really understood that, then their attitude toward Black people would be very different. If they really wrap their head around what that is, and more importantly, if we as a people wrap it,
that's what I was going to say. Yeah,
we could take that money and invest it in other Black businesses. So it's on two levels. This conversation is not only about white people, investing in Black businesses. It's about Black people investing in Black business, about people of color investing in Black businesses as well. So that's a really key point. So business can take a cue from that. That's one. Secondly, it's more than just looking at discrimination and the moral elements. It's looking at making a big difference in how people are treated, consciously looking to seek out people who have the abilities to excel, who are people of color, to excel in roles. Because diversity is more than just race, right? Diversity is a diversity of ideas, diversity of cultures coming together. How could that not benefit a company?
Right.
You get stale ideas with the same people driving the same points. You got boards that have all white people. That reminds me of juries. Juries have all white people and just trying to trial Black people being tried, and you got all white juries. I don't see a big difference with that in boardrooms. You got a boardroom where never had anybody Black, but then you're talking about trying to do stuff for people of color, for underprivileged, disadvantaged communities, terms like that. Truth of the matter is that the word minority really doesn't apply anymore. Actually, it does. The minority are people who are not people of color, are the minority on a global level, right? The global level, there are more people of color and than there are white people. So who's the minority on a global level, right? So let's eliminate that term and let's look at what can we do what can businesses do? They can take these false equivalents off the top. They can give more opportunity to folks. And that's going to take time, and that's going to take conversations. But that's the key. And if those businesses, I'll tell you a good example. Look at the NBA, right? The NBA during the George Floyd period, during the summer, during the bubble down there, they did a remarkable job. And you look at those sponsors, Nike, Reebok, Under Armour. You look at them across the board, Bounty, paper towels. They know who the consumer is. They know who's putting money in their pocket. And they were quick to jump on board and say, hey, we're all about diversity, because they know economically it makes the most sense.
Right. Whew, man. Whew, man, we can talk about this for another half an hour, but we're not. It's time to go. But my brother Tyrone Coles, I want to thank you so much for being here and sharing not only your wisdom, but sharing your wisdom from your passion. Thank you so very much for being here. I want to let everybody know about what we're having up for next week. Next week on Race Talk, we will be having a panel discussion, which will be led by Mr. Kenneth Chamberlain Jr. He is the founder of the Westchester Coalition for Police Reform. Mr. Chamberlain Jr.'s father was killed by a police officer, and the other two members of that panel, or there's a 4-person panel, 2 other members have had their loved ones killed by police as well. So Mr. Chamberlain is a timeless advocate for police reform. So this is what we're going to be discussing next week on Race Talk with Lane in Eugene. Once again, my brother Tyrone, thank you so very much for being here. Man.
Thank you, Gene. I want to thank, if I may, the Race Talk family. Thank you, Gene. Thank you, Lane, for so much. Today's my birthday, and what a wonderful way to give a gift. Give me the gift by allowing me to have the honor of presenting this. So what a wonderful birthday gift. Thank you, Gene. Thank you.
Tyrone, thank you so much. We will be talking soon. All right?
Peace out, my brother.
Peace.